The story people tell is simple. One morning, the cage was left open. If you paused this video right here and asked yourself, what would the bird do? You already feel the weight of it. Because this isn't just about a bird. It's about you. It's about the moments when life finally stops holding you by the throat. When the lock that kept you in loosens with a soft click, and you realize the bars around you were never the whole story. They were just familiar. Here's the part we rarely talk about. Most cages don't look like cages. They look like steady paychecks that cost you your voice. They look like the approval of people who never learned your name, the safe habits that keep your feet on the ground but your heart out of the sky. They look like routines that whisper, stay here, at least you know how this pain feels. They look like I'm fine text messages. They look like being needed so much that you forget you're allowed to want. So let me ask again. If the door opened today, what would you do? Before you answer, let me paint the picture with the gentleness it deserves. Imagine a small bird, not exotic, not rare. Just an ordinary creature the color of soft clouds at sunrise, feathers dusted with the faintest gold. Its feet know the perch by memory. The tiny grooves in the wood, the spot where it chews because it has nothing else to do with its time. In the corner, a little bell, it rings when the apartment goes quiet. On the floor of the cage, seed shells like miniature boats, empty and light. The bird has a song, but it learned to ration it. The world didn't clap when it sang. The world didn't even look up. Eventually, the bird started saving its song for safe moments. When the TV was on low, when the house was still, when the light turned amber and shadows stretched long enough to feel like company. The door was always there. That's the first truth. The second truth is sharper. The door wasn't always unlocked, but even when it was, the bird didn't know what to do with the space on the other side. Let's be honest. Freedom is not a straight line sprint into sunlight. Freedom begins in your chest with a tremor. Am I allowed? It begins with a conflict so human it hurts. A tug of war between gratitude for what kept you alive and a grief for all the miles you didn't travel while you were staying safe. And then, one morning, someone forgets to slide the latch back. Could be by accident. It often is. The way a friend says, "Why don't you apply?" The way a teacher circles a line in your essay and writes, "You have a voice." The way a stranger at church overhears you hum and says, "That song, is that you?" The way the boss looks over the cubicle and says, "There's an opening in the department you've been carrying from the shadows." The way your mirror, after years of telling you the same tired story, suddenly shows you a face that belongs to someone you respect. The way your own body refuses to keep going as if nothing is wrong. The way your heartbeat becomes a rebel drum and your breath, a broken alarm that will not quiet until you listen. This is the hinge moment. The latch is up. The door is ajar. The room still looks the same. The couch with the throw blanket, the chipped mug, the sink that drips when it rains. But the air has shifted. It's thinner, lighter, an invitation written in oxygen. The bird stands on its perch and tilts its head. Its body remembers generations of sky. Its bones grew hollow so it could defy gravity. No one taught it how to read a calendar or clock. It knows only three truths: light, wind, open. The door is the same shape as its longing. It takes a half step toward it and retreats. It does this a dozen times, not because it is weak, but because it is careful. Because sky is a big commitment and cages are consistent, and consistency masquerades as kindness. And here is where people ruin the story. This is where they rush it. They say, "The bird leapt," as if courage is always loud, as if leaving is a single, cinematic moment. But most leaving is a choreography of small hesitations. The bird doesn't leap, it leans, it inches. It places one foot outside the frame of what it knows and waits for the air to hold. It measures risk with an ancient instrument. Feel. Does the wind feel like an enemy or a hand? This is where you are, isn't it? Standing at the lip of an open door, feeling ridiculous for shaking, wondering why go isn't simple when stay is so heavy. If you've ever stayed in a relationship 6 months after your hope moved out, if you've ever kept a job that paid your rent and taxed your soul, if you've ever rehearsed a dream until your throat went hoarse and then folded it in a drawer because the world was loud and you were tired, you know what the bird knows. That freedom is not a location but a decision you reinforce until it becomes your new normal. So when I tell you the cage was left open, don't picture fireworks. Picture a quiet room. Picture a small body learning how to trust the invisible again. Picture a pause long enough to rewrite a life. Picture a breath. Picture another. Picture the first note of a song that isn't trying to impress anyone. It's just honest. And now, answer me honestly. If the door opened today, what would you do? If you're like most of us, you do what the bird did, but that comes later. Right now, I want you to feel the possibility collect in your ribs. I want you to realize that the latch was never your permission slip. You don't need an audience or a certificate or a green light from the same voices that doubted you. You were built with sky in mind. One morning, the cage was left open. This story is about what happened next, because what the bird did is what you can do. Her name was Ray Whitaker, 26, born between the steel gray of Ohio winters and the amber of late September football games. She worked the morning shift at a diner off Route 33 where the coffee was always strong and the advice was free if you sat at the counter long enough. Her apron pockets held three things she couldn't lose: a pen, a small notebook, and a photograph of a bird that used to sit on her mother's windowsill. The bird had been a rescue, a cockatiel the color of sunlit ash with a stubborn crest and eyes that always looked like they were listening. Ray's mother called the bird Glory because the year they found it, they'd lost almost everything else: the house, the car, the sense that the universe could be kind. Glory arrived in a borrowed cage, sang at odd hours, and followed her mother from room to room like a tiny winged shadow. When Ray left for school, Glory was on the back of a dining chair. When she came home, Glory was there to greet her before homework and chores and helping her brother with multiplication. It was a silly thing, a bird with a cage, but it felt like an anchor. A reminder that even if life put bars around you, some part of you could still sing. After her mother died, the apartment turned into a museum of unfinished sentences. There was still the mug with the chipped rim she refused to throw away. The cookbook open to a page stained with butter from a Christmas when they didn't have much but had each other. The radio with the dial stuck between two stations so music always arrived fuzzy and magical. Ray kept the bird because losing it too felt like a test she wasn't strong enough to pass. She moved Glory's cage to the small kitchen where the sun found them, where mornings felt less cruel if she had company. Work paid rent and groceries and the kind of emergencies that show up like uninvited relatives. A flat tire, a fever, a notice on pink paper. The diner was a place people came to be known. Truckers whose logbooks were stories with dates. Nurses just off graveyard shifts with tired, soft eyes. Teachers grading essays with red pens that bled on napkins. Couples who didn't talk, families who did. The woman who always ordered toast, dry, like a ritual she couldn't explain. The man who left jokes instead of tips and then came back, embarrassed, with a 20 and an apology. Ray learned how to listen with her eyebrows and her shoulders, how to make people feel like the small, fluorescent world could hold their big, shadowy feelings. What she didn't learn, not yet, was how to imagine her life beyond it. She wasn't stuck because she lacked ambition. Ray's ambition lived in a notebook with blue lines and a spiral that snagged on everything. She wrote between shifts, a page of a children's story about a bird that didn't know how to sing until it saw itself in a window. A paragraph about her mother's hands and how they always knew how to rescue broken things. A sentence that read, "I want to build a life that doesn't scare me with its sameness." She wrote in whispers because it felt dangerous to want. Wanting was a door her budget couldn't afford. Her friends were generous with their faith. "You're going to be something, Ray," they said. "You're already something," they corrected. The diner manager, a weathered softy named Joe, told her she had manager energy, like a compliment he couldn't polish. The community college down the road mailed flyers that ended up in the drawer with the good scissors. Ray stacked reasons like dishes and then washed them, one by one, each night until she forgot why she was sad. At home, Glory sang. Even in grief, the bird remembered a world beyond cages. Sometimes, when the apartment was very quiet, her brother out with friends, the TV silent, the night padded in snowfall, Ray moved the cage closer to the window, opened the door, and watched Glory stand on the threshold. It never flew away. It hopped to the edge like a question mark and peered at the world Ray never quite claimed. She envied how the bird negotiated fear without shame. Glory wasn't embarrassed of its hesitation, simply honored it. Then, when the sky and the heart agreed, it took small flights across the room. A private ballet with no audience and no applause, just the hush of beating wings. Ray's cage was invisible and deeply American. It was the way people smiled at her and said, "At least you have a job." It was the way she learned to say, "I'm okay," instead of, "I'm lonely." It was the way she pretended she didn't want to risk failure because failure felt like poverty and she had already met poverty. She didn't want to date it. It was the way she measured progress in tips and timesheets, not in the girl she had promised her mother she'd become. It was the way grief made a home in her routines and she fed it, like a stray cat, because it meowed at the right times and made her feel needed. On Sundays, she drove to the river and sat in her car watching water push past, never in a hurry, always moving. She wanted to be more like that, less like a map, more like a river. A map demands decisions. A river forgives detours. She would put her forehead on the steering wheel and breathe. Sometimes, she spoke to her mother as if voicemail could reach the other side of the sky. "I'm trying," she said. "I'm tired," she admitted. "I don't know how to begin," she confessed. The river answered with patience. Begin like water does, by showing up, even when no one claps. And still, the door stayed shut. Not because the world held it closed, but because Ray didn't know what life required of her once it was open. Safety had become a love language. Predictability was a blanket. The unknown felt like winter without heat. Then came the morning that changed everything. Not with trumpets, not with a miracle stamped with a return address, just with human error and the ordinary grace of a hinge. Ray woke to the sound of snow arguing with the streetlights. Fat flakes that made noise only if you listened with your eyes. The apartment was cold enough to make her breath visible, a soft ghost in the air. She shuffled to the kitchen, feet in thick socks, and saw it immediately. The cage door was open. She had cleaned Glory's cage the night before and, exhausted, left the door ajar. A small oversight in a life that felt like 1,000 little duties stacked carefully. The window above the sink was cracked, letting in a blade of winter air. The bird stood on the threshold, crest twitching, eyes bright with the empire of the apartment spread before it like a map. Ray's first instinct was panic. This was how you lost things, by relaxing. She took a step forward, hands raised as if approaching a flicker of flame. But Glory didn't spook. It looked at her like it was waiting for permission Ray didn't realize she could give. She froze. In that freeze, 100 memories rose like geese from a field. Her mother's laugh, the day the landlord was kind, the night they ate pancakes for dinner and called it a celebration, the time a teacher wrote "You're a writer" in the margin of her essay and Ray kept the paper like a life raft. Her phone buzzed. A text from Joe, "Storm's nasty. We're short-staffed. Can you come in early?" Another from the community college. "Last day to enroll for spring. Returning students eligible for grant assistance." And a third, a voicemail transcribed into jagged lines. "This is Ohio Press and Print. We received your submission for the short story contest. Please call us back." She hadn't told anyone she submitted the story. It was a draft she wrote at 2 a.m., a letter to the girl she would have been if life had been kinder. She nearly didn't send it. She told herself, "What's the point?" And then sent it anyway, like tossing a paper airplane into weather. Glory hopped, 1 foot outside the cage, 1 foot in, a perfect statue of Ray's life. The bird leaned into the air and let it press against its chest like a curious hand. Pushed back with an instinct older than cages. Stepped out, completely onto the rim. Ray felt something in her unclench. A small room in her heart opened a window and said, "Let the cold in. Breathe." She put a small dish of seed on the counter and another on the windowsill. She spoke quietly, the way her mother did when coaxing hurt things into bravery. "It's okay," she said, and she didn't know if she was talking to Glory or herself. She remembered what the grief counselor said after the funeral. Sometimes what keeps us alive is what keeps us from living. She hadn't liked the sentence then. It felt like betrayal of the things that held her together. The diner, the apartment, the routines that made sense. Now it returned without teeth. more like a hand on her shoulder. Her brother, Aaron, padded into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Doors open," he said, helpful as a narrator. He was 19 going on 40, a kid who learned responsibility young and now wore it like a backpack he refused to take off. He had dreams too, the Marines, then maybe a trade, but he stayed for Ray. He stayed because staying is what Whitakers did. Held the line, kept the lights on, worked, paid, repeated. "I know," Ray said. "I left it. I think it's okay." Aaron looked at her the way boys look at their big sisters when they realize they've been women all along, with a new respect that feels like mourning. "You good?" he asked. "No," she said, honest for once. "But I might be brave." He nodded. "I'll warm up the car." He left. Glory leaned into the open, shook out its wings, then lifted. A small, private miracle. It flew not to the window, not to Wild, but to Ray's shoulder. It sat there, a little engine of heat and heartbeat, close enough for her to feel each flutter. It wasn't leaving. It was learning the room with confidence it hadn't needed before. Her phone buzzed again. Joe insistent. The storm was real. The diner needed her. The college reminder buzzed a second time, like a friend who refuses to be too polite when your life is on the line. The contest number sat there like an unopened door. Ray realized that 3 doors had swung open at once. Work, duty, school, future, story, voice. And she knew the truth she'd been avoiding. If she answered only duty, she would never have enough hands left to reach for the other 2. She called Joe. "I can come in," she began, then stopped. She had never stopped mid-sentence with him. "I can come in at my regular time. I can't come early." There was silence, then a huff. "It's a mess out here, Ray." "I know," she said, and she felt her spine stand up. "I'm enrolling this morning. I'll be there at 10. Joe wasn't a villain, he was a man with bills, too. "All right," he said reluctantly. "Drive safe." She hung up and dialed the college. A woman named Denise with a laugh like a brass bell walked her through forms that usually felt like mazes. "You're eligible for a grant," Denise said. "You wrote a story about your mom? Honey, that's bravery with punctuation. Let's get you signed up for 2 classes. Don't overstuff the plate on your first day of freedom." Ray laughed and cried at once. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of course you are," Denise said, like she was telling Ray the weather. "That means you're outside the cage. Good morning, Bird." Ray called the contest office. A man said words she didn't hear at first because her heart was loud. "First place," he repeated. "It's a small prize and a printed feature, but it's something. We'd like to publish your piece. Are you free to read at our local event next month?" Freedom is funny. It never arrives with perfect timing. It shows up when your car needs new tires and your boss needs you early and the storm says don't even try. It shows up when your bird sits on your shoulder instead of the windowsill. It shows up in human scale and asks for a yes that feels too small to matter, and then rearranges your map around that yes. Ray closed the cage door gently, not as a prison but as a choice. Glory had what it needed, room to practice sky without getting lost in it. Ray put on her coat, wrote "thank you" on a sticky note for Aaron, and taped the college flyer to the fridge like a flag. She grabbed her notebook and wrote 1 line before she left. The door was open and still. She chose to stay with herself. Then she stepped into the storm. The next chapter of Ray's life didn't look like a movie montage scored by swelling strings. It looked like a community college hallway that smelled faintly of pencil shavings and possibility. It looked like freezing mornings where the bus was late and the dyed salt on the sidewalk ate her boots. It looked like a shift at the diner that didn't end until her calves ached, followed by a night class where the professor's voice was kind and the room was full of adults whispering to themselves. Is it too late? It looked like a new word. No. She practiced it softly until it fit her mouth. No, I can't cover your shift. No, I can't make the baby shower on Tuesday. I have class. No, I don't have to justify wanting something for myself. It looked like Glory learning the living room. The bird would stand on the threshold, hop to the coffee table, to the back of the couch, to raise wrist as she did homework. Sometimes it flew to the curtain rod and watched the world as if auditioning for it. It always returned to the cage to eat, to sleep, to pause. Freedom, Ray learned, wasn't abandoning the safe places. It was letting them be what they were, perches, not prisons. In English Comp, Ray wrote an essay titled Maps and Rivers. The professor circled a line. I thought the cage was keeping me alive. Maybe it did. But one day I woke up and realized I had outgrown it. That's not betrayal. That's biology. He wrote in the margin, this will save someone. Keep going. In creative writing, she read her winning story out loud. A letter to her mother about courage that doesn't roar. The audience was small but sacred. People cried quietly. When it ended, the room didn't clap right away because they were busy breathing. Afterward, a woman with a denim jacket and a scar like a moon sliver on her lip said, I lost my mom too. I haven't written a word since. This woke something. Ray didn't know how to hold the weight of that, so she did what her mother would have done. She took the woman's hand in both of hers and said, I'm glad you're still here. Work changed. Not because the diner transformed into a dream, but because Ray moved through it differently. She started a little thing she called table notes. Between refills, she carried tiny slips of paper in her apron, and when a conversation felt like it needed a second draft, she left a sentence with the check. You're braver than you realize. The way you love your kid is a miracle. You are not your worst day. People kept these notes like lucky pennies. One trucker taped his to the dashboard. The woman with dry toast cried and ordered butter. Joe, who had once grumbled about her boundaries, found her in the walk-in cooler and said, You're good for this place, kid. Also, I'm sorry I've been leaning on you like a crutch. That was the thing about doors. When yours opens, you either drag everyone through it or you bless them from where you are and keep walking. Ray learned to bless. Aaron shipped to basic training in the fall. Before he left, he stood in the kitchen with Glory perched like a tiny sentinel and said, You did it, Ray. She frowned. What did I do? You started, he said. That's the part one couldn't do for you. Ray's apartment changed too subtly. She replaced the bulb over the sink with one that made the room less tired. She bought a plant that needed light and attention and found herself rising to the request. She turned the radio dial until the music came in clear. She threw out the grief cat. Not her grief. She kept that, a friend who had learned to be quiet and respectful, but the habit of feeding it with rituals that dulled her. She let joy sit at the table without apologizing for being loud. On Saturdays, she volunteered at the public library's story hour. Children gathered like falling stars, in clusters, asking questions with the gravity of philosophers. Ray read books about birds, about courage, about small things that know they are not small. One little boy named Miles had a stutter. He sat with his fists clenched like he was angry at his own mouth. When Ray finished the story, she asked if anyone wanted to try reading a page. Miles raised his hand halfway and then looked at it like it had betrayed him. You can do it with me, Ray said. We'll share the work. He stood beside her in dinosaur pajamas and read a sentence a word at a time, Ray filling in when he needed to breathe. At the end, he looked at her like she had slid a key across a table. The door was open, he said, and Ray understood. The phrase had entered the town's bloodstream. Quiet wisdom doesn't arrive with a diploma. It arrives with a day you almost quit and didn't. It arrives with a morning when snow makes the world hush and you realize the hush is inside you. 2. It arrives when you say yes to a reading, no to an extra shift, yes to a life that reminds you of who you promised to be, no to the voice that grew fat off your fear. And the surprise? The bird never left. That's what stunned people when Ray told the story. They expected the bird to fly out the window and vanish into a narrative that punished kindness. But Glory stayed because freedom wasn't about departure. It was about dignity. The bird, like Ray, discovered that open didn't have to mean away, could mean more. More sky in familiar rooms, more song in ordinary mornings, more choices where duty used to live alone. When Ray graduated with her associate's degree, a ceremony at the same gym where she once shelved possibilities, she wore a cap that Aaron had mailed from a base 3 states away. In neat block letters he had written, Open. Her mother's friend, Donna, cried in the second row, clutching a program like a tissue. Denise from enrollment shouted, "Yes!" like a cheerleader who'd seen the play drawn up 100 times and still thrilled to watch it run. Joe shut the diner early and brought a sheet cake with "Congrats, Ray," piped in shaky icing. Glory sang when Ray brought the diploma home and taped it to the wall above the desk where her notebook lived. After the ceremony, Ray stood in her apartment, cap in hand, and opened the cage. Glory stepped out without drama and flew to the curtain rod, then to her shoulder, then to the space above her head where it hovered like punctuation. A comma, not a period. A promise that the sentence wasn't over. That night, she wrote a new story. Not for a contest, not for school, but for the little boy with dinosaur pajamas, and for the woman with the denim jacket and scar, and for the trucker and the nurse and the dry toast lady, and for you, sitting wherever you are, measuring the air with your ribs. She wrote, "The door is open. I'm not running. I'm not staying. I'm practicing." Practice became her kind of faith. She practiced saying yes to dates that made her laugh instead of shrink. She practiced walking into rooms that scared her a little and leaving rooms that didn't know her name. She practiced rest. She practiced asking for help. She practiced joy like it was a language she used to be fluent in. And in that practice, the world felt bigger and kinder. Not because it changed first, but because she did. Here's the part where I hand you the key you already hold. We live in a country that sells freedom on billboards and then sneaks cages into our closets. The cages look like debt and family scripts and jobs that pay you in exhaustion. They look like a town that never asks you what you love because it remembers who your father was. They look like the same pew every Sunday and the same corner booth every Friday and the safety of being the version of yourself everyone expects. The door being open doesn't mean the cages were imaginary. It means you have a decision to make that no one can make for you. So what did the bird do when the cage was left open? It didn't bolt. It didn't perform. It honored the scale of its courage. It took one step, then another. It learned the room again. It chose closeness before distance, honesty before theater. It flew in circles not because it was lost, but because it was mapping a new world. That's what you can do too. Maybe you thought freedom demanded fireworks. Quit your job dramatically, move across the country, shave your head, sell everything, start a brand new life at sunrise. For some people, that's the way. For most of us, freedom is quieter. It's the refusal to betray yourself in small ways. It's saying, "I can't make it early today," when duty tries to guilt you into erasing yourself. It's enrolling in 2 classes instead of 7 because you respect your bandwidth and want this new life to be sustainable. It's leaving the door open for your future self without blaming your past self for needing the cage. If you are carrying grief, a parent gone, a marriage ending, a dream that outgrew its shape, you are not broken. You are between versions. Be gentle with the animal in you that is learning to trust the wind again. Be patient with your fear. Fear is evidence you are near the border of something important. If you are afraid of failing, let me say this plainly. Failure is not a verdict. It is a vantage point. It does not make a home in your bones unless you build it a room. You can fail at tasks and still succeed at being someone you respect. You can fail in public and still keep your private dignity. You can fail today and get up tomorrow and be one decision away from a life you didn't know you were allowed to want. If you are listening to this and thinking of the mouths you feed, the elders you care for, the bills that show up like winter, I see you. Open doesn't always mean away. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is carve a small hour in a loud day and dedicate it to the person you promised to be. 1 hour. No apologies. Put it on the calendar in ink. This is not selfish. This is stewardship. You cannot pour from a body you've abandoned. You cannot parent yourself into a future you never visit. Here's a practice for this week, borrowed from Ray and Glory. On the perch, name one safe place that supports you, a routine, a room, a person. Keep it. Don't demonize it. Perches are how birds rest between flights. On the threshold, name one small edge you can stand on: an application, a phone call, a class, a conversation. Schedule it. Put your foot there and feel your heart argue. Breathe. On the flight, choose one action that feels one size bigger than your fear. Submit, enroll, say no, Say yes, ask, leave, begin. Do it messy. Do it while your hands shake. Do it without a soundtrack. The return. Come home to your perch. Feed yourself. Celebrate without turning celebration into a second job. Write down what you learned so the next flight is informed by memory, not panic. And when the guilt arrives, because cages teach loyalty to bars, remember, loyalty is beautiful when it's to people and values, not to patterns that shrink you. Be loyal to your becoming. Be loyal to the version of you that your younger self prayed for at 2 a.m. with the TV on low. Be loyal to the one who stayed through the worst of it. That loyalty requires open doors. I want you to picture the room you're in right now. Picture the door. Picture it open. Not a crack, not a sliver. Open. Now picture yourself standing. The space between sitting and standing is an everyday miracle. We do it so often we forget to clap. Stand. Feel your body learn balance again. Take a step. This is how you leave cages. At the speed of honesty. One day soon, someone will ask you how you did it. They will ask, how did you go back to school at 36? How did you leave that relationship without setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm? How did you open your mouth and sing? And you will have a dozen possible answers: mentors, programs, grants, luck. But the truest one will be this: I noticed the door was open, and I chose to be someone who walks through. You don't have to do it alone. Find your Denise, your Joe who learns, your brother who says, you started. Find the library story hour that needs your voice, the community that knows your name, the friend who texts you the application link, the teacher who writes you have a voice in a margin and means it. Let people be your wind. Let love make a habit of nudging. And if you can't find any of that yet, then start by being that for yourself. Write the margin note. Tape the word open to your fridge. Leave yourself table notes like Ray did for strangers. Say kinder things in your own direction. Become the kind of home that your future self runs toward, not away from. Now, the CTA, clean and simple, not because algorithms need it, but because your life does. Tell me in the comments. What is one door that's open in your life right now, and what is one small step you will take through it this week? Put it in language your future self can recognize. I will email the advisor. I will take a 30-minute walk and think without my phone. I will say no to the shift that steals my class time. I will sign up. I will ask for help. I will rest. If the story made your chest feel bigger, hit like, not for me, but to tell the YouTube gods more of this, please. Maybe the next person who needs this door will find it because you propped it open. Subscribe if you want weekly proof that cages aren't destiny, that ordinary people choose sky, that we are all birds with complicated hearts and beautiful maps, practicing. Every video is a seed. Some will land on hard ground. Some will land in your pocket, and you'll carry them until you need them most. A few will sprout right away and surprise you. That's how this works. And to the part of you that still whispers, what if I'm not ready? Hear me. Readiness is often a story fear tells, so you'll wait. Courage is a verb. It grows by use. The door is open. The weather is imperfect. Your wings are untested in this light. It doesn't matter. Begin like the bird did, with one honest step. Then another. Then another. I'll be right here, clapping for the quiet flights and the loud ones. For the days you perch and the days you soar. For the mornings you forget you're free and the evenings you remember. What the bird did when the cage was left open is what you can do today. Open.